So would you like to start with any opening remarks?
Good afternoon. It's been a long day. I'm Bill Cluck. I'm a current member of the board, but I want to emphasize I'm not here on behalf of the board or the authority. I do not speak for the board. We have a 3-member board, and we make decisions as a group. I'm here today basically as a private citizen, but historically I've been, I guess, called a citizen activist in terms of monitoring or watching what was going on with the incinerator project. What I've prepared for the committee, I emailed it last night and I believe copies were made for everybody, is a rather lengthy document that I'm not going to read. However, what it does do is it provides a summary of the history of the authority, so you have a little idea of the legalities of the name of the authority, when it was changed from the incinerator authority, etc. Then there is a brief summary of the waste management facility prior to the retrofit. How many tons per day, the types of issues that it had, a list of the repair projects. At this point, though, what I'm going to do is sort of interject responses to comments I heard today. The retrofit project isn't 2003. The decision was made as early as the summer of 2000. That's 3 years of a process that led up to the $125 million retrofit financing. In August of 2000 was the first time that representatives of the city and the authority met with Barlow. The contract, the only contract ever voted on by the board of the Harrisburg Authority, was November 16, 2000, a professional services agreement never subject to public competitive bidding. And it's not required to, because it's professional services. There has never been any other vote on a Barlow contract, yet they got paid millions of dollars without board action. If there was a process to seek competitive bids for the retrofit of the incinerator, it had to come from the city. It is not in the files of the Harrisburg Authority, and it was not presented in the forensic investigation when they sought documents. We were told there was a flood at the warehouse at the incinerator, so all of the records of the former Department of Incineration no longer exist. We were told that Dan Lispy's files from the time that he was the head of special, special projects for the city are missing. I mean, we heard the story that they were transferred to the Harrisburg Authority in 2007. The people at the authority didn't know what to do with them, so they sent them back to the city, and now the city can't find them. So, what I know from reading through these is Barlow prepared a phase 1 feasibility study, and it cost $700,000. They were then authorized to do a phase 2 study, and I'll quote this, the design basis Barlow initially proceeded with proved to be too expensive. Barlow's purpose was to design a facility so it could generate sufficient revenue to pay off the old and new debt. Now that sounds logical, but it sounds like they were tweaking the engineering and the design for a financial purpose rather than an operational purpose. And as we now know, there was significant engineering defects that occurred. My questions are, who was in charge? Was it the authority or the city? You heard today from a former member of the board, you know, they're busy people. They're volunteers. We don't get paid to serve on municipal authority boards. So we rely upon the professionals. Well, unfortunately, this was the most important project in the history of the city. And I don't accept the explanation that, well, I'm too busy to read through a 100-page prospectus. I'm too busy to ask questions of my legal and financial team. I can't believe there was not more public discussion at authority board meetings. The city council did hold public hearings throughout the city in 2003 to their credit. And there were people who spoke out against this project. And there were people who said, you're underestimating the costs. Mike Ewald, an environmentalist from Philadelphia, testified before City Council the night of November 3rd, 2003, and said, you are underestimating the costs, the revenues are off, you will go bankrupt. And he repeated that phrase over and over and over. And in response, the gentleman from Buchard Horn, the so-called independent contractor that city council paid $50,000 to, poo-pooed their criticism of the report. And if you read the forensic audit, the Buchard Horn so-called independent report has a so-called worst-case scenario. Well, that worst-case scenario isn't even close to what actually occurred here. But everybody then relied upon the Buchard Horn report. Dauphin County's professionals all said, looks reasonable to me. HRG, the engineers, we read the Buchard Horn report. Now, we didn't actually look at the assumptions that are in the Barlow pro forma or the Buchard Horn report, but it all seems reasonable, and that's the magic word. PFM on behalf of the county, it all seems reasonable. Meddy Evans, the law firm. Here's the opinions of the engineers, here's the independent opinion. All of this seems reasonable. Nobody did a close analysis or adequate due diligence of Barlow. Nobody looked at Barlow's history and financials. They do drop little sentences that say, oh, by the way, they've never done a project this big. That should set off some warnings. And what it should have set off was people to oversee the construction of this project. So what did we do? We hired Reynolds Construction. Reynolds Construction Management, an excellent firm based in the city. They are politically connected, as is everybody involved. I think I used the term political cronyism. That's what goes on here. Now, they're all qualified professionals, but when you look down who gets the bids, who gets the work, lawyers, financial advisors, construction, now go compare it to the campaign finance donations. There's a pay-to-play that goes on here. Now, chicken versus the egg, which one comes first? I don't know, I don't care. What I would like the committee to look at is I think constitutionally you can prohibit someone who makes a political contribution from receiving a contract. I'm not saying you can prohibit campaign contributions, but I think you can prohibit the contracting with that professional. The city of Philadelphia now has a law in place with terms of their bond deals, that their professionals who do the bond deals can't be people who contribute. And that's part of the problem here. You got people who are wedded to each other. No one was willing to stand up and say, Mr. Mayor, this project shouldn't go forward. It's not going to work. Now, I don't know that there was bad intent, but clearly there was a mindset to get a deal done. This deal had to get done, or else we got $100 million in stranded debt. We're going to have to increase property taxes 400, 500, 600%. All the good things that happened in the city from 1980 until 2000 goes down the toilet. If this project fails, the city fails. So the Harrisburg Authority contracts with Reynolds Construction. Now, I don't know if they knew, but Reynolds Construction was serving as the construction manager for Barlow. Now, the forensic investigation says that's sort of a conflict. That the authority, as the owner, hires somebody to oversee the construction manager, and the construction manager appears to be the same entity. That's a problem. The other problem is a former member of the board appears to have been employed by Reynolds at the time that person was on the board. Now, I've read the Roads and Signage June 26th legal opinion, and it's accurate. There are two different statutes that govern conflicts of interest. That opinion was requested by that former member of the board at a public meeting of the Harrisburg Authority on June 25th, the day before. That member said, I need to speak to the executive director and the solicitor because I may have a financial interest in the project. On June 26th, Roads and Signage writes a legal opinion that says, as a public official, as you all well know, you must abstain from any vote and disclose the reason. But that's not what the Municipal Authorities Act says. The Municipal Authorities Act is a flat-out prohibition on any member of the board having any direct or indirect financial interest in any contract. And in fact, recently the Pennsylvania Ethics Commission entered into consent agreements with two other former chairpersons of the Harrisburg Authority based on violations of the Public Officials Law. What was interesting to me was in those consent agreements, there's no mention of the Municipal Authorities Act. And when contacted, the executive director of the Ethics Commission said, we do not have jurisdiction under the Ethics Act to prosecute or go forward under the Municipal Authorities Act. Then who does? All the statute says is, if that conflict occurs, the contract's void. Well, the contract was performed 8 years ago. What's the remedy? Who has any rights? Is this another statute with no teeth? And I went off a little bit there, but going back to my presentation, I've included a chart. And I'm big on chronologies. If you put things in a chronological order, you can see what happened. And I started in 1972. And you can go through and see who the party is, what the event was. If there's a financing, I included the amount of the financing and a list of the cost of issuance, who got paid at closing. And it's the same law firms. Sometimes they're the underwriters counsel, sometimes they're the bond counsel. What wasn't discussed today is the relationship between Dauphin County and the city of Harrisburg. This is an old political fight that goes back, it could be the 80s. In 88, the legislature passed this Act 101 statute that requires 10-year waste plans. And Dauphin County, in their plan, excluded the incinerator. And obviously the mayor wasn't happy about that. And there was litigation, there was appeals to the Environmental Hearing Board, and ultimately in 1995 there was a settlement. And in the settlement, the county agreed they would use their best efforts to assist the city with the incinerator. The real change occurs in November of 1999 with the election of John Payne and Loman Henry to the Dauphin County Commissioners. They ran on the platform one of their issues to close the Dauphin Meadows, formerly known as Folk Road landfill, because there was citizen opposition. And not only citizen opposition, our local state senator was opposed to that landfill. The commissioners formed a task force. The first thing they did when they took office in January 2000. And who was on at the time, Dauphin County had their own solid waste authority, and they had incurred a lot of debt, and there was a lot of issues with them and a lot of mismanagement, and there was reasons why they should be looked at. So the commissioners appointed a task team consisting of 3 people: Commissioner Payne, Mayor Reed, and Andy Giorgio. Andy at the time was a former city solicitor. At the time, he was appointed and approved by Dauphin County Court to serve as a special counsel to Dauphin County. And throughout this process, Andy ended up representing everybody at some point in time throughout this process. It's not for me to say whether or not there was a conflict of interest, because they all seem to be on the same side of the goal of, we need waste from Dauphin County to be committed to the incinerator so that we can finance the retrofit of the incinerator. It starts with the task force report that recommends a change in the structure of how Dauphin County does business. In 2002, the commissioners passed a resolution that says all waste shall go to incinerator once the retrofit is done. Then comes the issue of, well, now the county has to do a secondary guarantee to make the financing reasonable. Throughout that process, that's when I get involved. And my concern is, although this is happening at a meeting of the commissioners held in public in a room like this at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, their agendas are not public before the meeting. Nobody has any idea what they're going to do at the business portion of the meeting. At the time, they weren't well, they're still not televised in Dauphin County. So unless you're an employee or an insider, you don't know what goes on. I was starting to go to meetings because I was, what are you going to do about the 10-year plan? And I show up at a meeting where I look at the agenda, and Andy Giorgio's on the agenda talking about this resolution that would commit all waste to the incinerator. And I just, where's the public notice and opportunity for the 39 municipalities to comment? When does the public get to chime in on whether or not this is appropriate? Should all waste go? Well, Dauphin County, they get a $50 tipping fee. If they agree to commit all the waste, they get a fixed tipping fee, $50 per ton. That's the deal. If you participate in the financing, You get that's your rate, and it can only go up based on inflation. However, although the contract limits rate increases, Dauphin County is now up about $78, $79 a ton. The city of Harrisburg is now $200 per ton, the second highest rate in the country. That's how the incinerator can generate the revenue in 2012 that was predicted in 2003 because the rates had gone through the roof, and it has burdened the taxpayers and ratepayers of the county and the city. And it may or may not get better depending on if the incinerator is sold. One thing you didn't hear, if you go through the chronology, in 2004, Mr. Lispy left the employment of the city. And at the direction of the mayor, the board of the Harrisburg Authority was told to hire him as a consultant under a 3-year contract to oversee the construction management of the retrofit project. Now, there is logic to that. Dan's probably accurately one of the most knowledgeable people here. But I don't necessarily know his qualifications other than running the mayor's special projects and making sure, you know, the Hilton and City Island, all the good things Dan did for the city. I don't know that he's the solid waste engineer specialist that should have been overseeing what Barlow was doing. Why wasn't the Harrisburg Authority auditing the bills that Barlow was submitting? Why didn't they know that the subcontractor for the boiler hadn't ordered the steel at a time when prices in China for steel were going through the roof? How does all of this happen without our knowledge? And we all point the finger at Barlow. Barlow bad, Barlow bad, Barlow bad. Well, that is probably true, but shame on us for not having the systems in place to ensure it didn't happen. With a project of this size and this importance, the professionals were negligent. They were not only negligent in how, and you heard from Mr. Goldfield this morning on the financing, and that's way over my head. But as a citizen sitting here, I say to myself, when do I get to participate? When in the process? I mean, I heard about a taxpayer complaint today. I've never heard that before. I'm a practicing lawyer for 25 years. I know I can file an appeal of a decision, and I have 30 days to file an appeal. And nobody within 30, and first of all, when do I know something is submitted to DCED for them to review? What's the standard of review that the DCED is supposed to undertake? Is it a checklist of legal documents submitted, or do they read it? Do they ask questions about it? Now, I understand questions were asked, and I understand political influence occurred in some of those transactions. I'm not sure exactly who spoke to whom. I don't know if it was the mayor to the governor, or the mayor to the secretary, or an outside lobbyist to a secretary. I don't know that. I don't have any facts. I can't make an allegation. But I have heard it occurred, and that's troublesome. I can understand that Mrs. Barantini sees 700 of these, and it just goes over her head. There appears to be no documentation emails about meetings that would have occurred between the attorneys for the authority and DCED to review some of these documents. I know there was meetings, I know there was phone calls, but nobody writes a memo. What happened? What were the questions that were asked, and how were they resolved? There's no record of that anywhere. Thank you for your indulgence, by the way. I get to tell this story every once in a while. What I want to do is just, because the hour is late, I took some notes as everybody spoke this morning, and I just want to sort of, I call this cleaning up. A question was asked of DCED, whether or not they have a process for referral to the Attorney General. I'm not positive about this, but I don't think the Attorney General has jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute financial crimes without a referral from the appropriate agency. Now, I'm not positive about that, so don't take that as legal advice, but that's a change that has to happen. The Attorney General's office has to be given the ability to independently investigate financial crimes without the need for a referral from a politically motivated state agency. The Attorney General is supposed to be independent, they're supposed to be law enforcement, they should be all over this. I think our district attorneys should have been all over this, but frankly, the district attorney in Dauphin County, who's a wonderful man and a good person, has received campaign contributions from every single professional involved in all of these transactions. So as a result, that person should recuse themselves and refer the matter to the Attorney General. That has not happened here. Instead, I've read public comments that the district attorney hasn't read the forensic investigation, that sometimes mistakes are made, but they don't rise to the level of crimes. Well, if you haven't read the investigation, how can you reach that conclusion? And I've also heard people say, sometimes public projects fail. Well, that's unacceptable, because we have professionals paid a lot of money to ensure there's adequate security. Financing is appropriate. These people get paid a lot of money, and it's imperative that members of the Board of Public Authorities do their due diligence and ask the appropriate questions. I am very proud of my current board members, Mr. Kurowski, Mr. Majors, and myself. We spend hour after hour after hour going over everything, and it's primarily because in the past, the Harrisburg Authority was a rubber stamp for whatever the mayor wanted. Let me tell you about special projects. Special projects was started in 1991 by resolution of the Harrisburg Authority that said you can take administrative fees from non-city financings and put them into a special account, the special projects account. Later, the Harrisburg Authority Board passed a resolution delegating the authority to spend that money to the mayor of the city of Harrisburg. I have no idea if that's legal. I'm just telling you, pursuant to resolution, Mayor Reed had the power to spend that money, and it was millions of dollars, and he traveled around the country and he bought artifacts, and we now have a Civil War museum. And the concept was seek the structural money from the state, and the local match would come from the city or the authority, and that would be the artifacts. That's how the Civil War Museum was built, and it's a gorgeous facility. I'm just not aware of a business plan. I'm not aware of any public vetting where we were asked, can we sustain this? Are we going to be able to do this? Well, the vision was multiple museums, and the next one's the Sports Hall of Fame, and the next one's an African American museum, and then the next one is the Wild West Museum. And that's fine, and that was the mayor's vision. It was never vetted, but there was never buy-in from the public. So when it, and by the way, this all occurred at public meetings. The Harrisburg Authority Board meetings are public. Requisitions to authorize repayment of invoices for artifacts Steve rebought, they're public. Now, whether the Patriot News deemed to send a reporter to a meeting would depend on, I don't know, the level of staffing. And even when the reporter was there was never any coverage of this. Do members of the public go to these meetings? You know they don't. No, we don't. Only idiots like me who have nothing better to do. We go to the meetings and we watch closely to see what's going on. And we still don't get very many people to our meetings, as controversial as we are. Finally, the artifacts goes public in 2003 because the Business Journal wrote about it. And that's when City Council says, no more spending money on artifacts. Well, when it comes time to do the financing in 2003, the President of City Council holds up the vote. The vote's delayed because they want something. Everybody's getting something. What's in it for City Council? So you see in the forensic audit on pages 49 and 50, there's a series of emails where Mr. Giorgione reports to Mr. Lispy and Randy King, who was the mayor's spokesperson and sort of chief of staff at the time. Stan Mitchell, one of the lawyers, was speaking to City Council President Richard House that apparently Reynolds and Mr. Clark, I'm assuming that's who Freddie is, have something about $1 million. Now, my reading of that is Reynolds is going to get the contract for construction management, so that's how I interpret that. But what I want to know is it says, and they believe they have secured the votes of City Council. Now, I'm interested in that because the members of City Council were holding public hearings throughout the summer all over the city getting input. And what I was hearing from certain council people was the tremendous pressure being put on them to approve this project, to the point that former, now deceased councilperson John Green publicly complained at the level of pressure being put by people on behalf of the administration to vote for this project. And if you read the forensic investigation, there's a reference to, let's put some money aside for a special projects fund. This is a separate fund. This is not the artifacts, etc. This is what we ended up calling councilmatic funds, councilmatic grants, what you all know as WAMs. Walking around money for the members of city council to pass out around the city for whatever purpose they deemed appropriate. I don't know how much it was supposed to be. It looks like $500,000. The best I can determine based on a review, and this is not in the audit report, this is my work product. 2004, 2005, the members of city council passed resolutions, and all of these were pursuant to applications from people asking for money that the city went through their appropriate process to make sure it was a legitimate application. Council voted, and the money was given to let people go to a midget football game or a Miss America pageant or some conference, and some of it went to some decent programs throughout the city. Most of the nonprofits don't exist anymore, but it ended up being about $270,000. Where did that money come from? In the 2003 financing, $4.2 million was given to the city as a guarantee fee. Now, I don't know off the top of my head if all of that money was the amount that was needed to pay the former workers of the incinerator who had to transfer within the city because they're part of the ASPE union. I thought that payment came from other aspects of the financing. My understanding is these guarantee fees were put into the general fund of the city, which meant the city didn't have to raise taxes. And that's fine. So we kick things down the road. But the cost of the borrowing was increased by $4.2 million. And apparently, because the money went into the general fund, I can't do a direct tie, but the $270,000 that city council used for their WAMs had to have indirectly come from that. So in essence, city council held up the vote in order to get WAMs and increase the cost of the borrowing. Is that illegal? Not to my knowledge. But it's wrong. It didn't benefit the city, and it's costing the taxpayers today.
How much longer do you have, Mr. Cluck?
Last thing I wanted to say, bring in Covanta at your next at one of your hearings. I'd like to hear from Covanta about what it took for them to fix the Barlow project. Because my understanding is the Barlow technology generally is not there anymore. It's Covanta, and Covanta is the reason we're doing as well as we are from the revenue side. But we're getting our butts kicked because we just can't afford to pay debt service. Thank you for your time, for your attention. If you have questions as you read through that little chronology, I'm always available.
Thank you. Yeah, Senator Fulmer.
Mr. Cluck, thank you very much for your testimony. Mayor Reed told us that the Special Projects Fund is under the control of the authority, and you told us that it's under the control of the mayor. How do we find out the information to verify who's correct? And more importantly, how do we bring sunlight to all of this so that we can work toward true openness, transparency, and hopefully at some point, accountability?
It's a resolution of the Harrisburg Authority that delegates the power to spend to the mayor. Now, if we can parse words about ultimately, if the mayor submitted a receipt or a requisition and the Harrisburg Authority decided to reject it, then you can argue ultimate authority is with the Harrisburg Authority. They didn't reject a single receipt, ever.
Thank you. You've long been calling for investigation of the Harrisburg Incinerator. Today, we heard from 9 other people about the financial transactions. Who else should we be talking to?
Who else should you be talking to?
Yes.
Clearly, you know, I'd love for you to find a way to get James Barlow to come in. I think a lot of people would like to hear from James Barlow. Did you sell us a bill of goods? Did you know it was that you were underestimating? Were you walking on water? Or did this thing fail because the original Barlow representative tragically died?
You know, that'd be very good because it's from my own personal research, I found out that this technology was never used on an incinerator program as large as what was being
Oh, and I knew that was fully disclosed. It was always smaller. I mean, would it be able to scale up? And that's one of the issues about, you need to watch it closely. Clearly, the lawyers from Eckert Siemens, the lawyers from Mr. Giorgione from Buchanan Ingersoll. I mean, you're not looking to prosecute, so I don't know if you want to bring in HDR Engineering, who did the pro forma back in '98, I believe it was, that said it was self-liquidating. They were the first firm. Barlow was in 2003 that said self-liquidating. Another engineering firm had said this is self-liquidating. But if you actually read their report, they fully disclose this thing's going to shut down because of the EPA emission requirements, yet they still were able to call it self-liquidating. And that's, I mean, if you need changes in the law, it's got to be at the DCED standard of review. You have to build in rights of the public to participate. Maybe require notice in the Pennsylvania Bulletin. Well, not that, you know, us nerds read the bulletin, but something where it's not just the small print in the classifieds that City Council is going to vote on this project, and you just don't know what's in there. Something that says, and now it's going to DCED, you have a right to participate in the process and ask questions, et cetera. I'd be interested to know the judicial standard of review. If in fact there was a taxpayer complaint, if in fact DCD approves, what's the judge's standard of review? Was DCD's rubber stamping arbitrary and capricious? Was it unreasonable? Was it an abuse of discretion? Or does it have to be based on substantial evidence? I'd like a standard to say it has to be based on substantial evidence and somebody has to verify the numbers are accurate. The Barlow pro forma is a joke. If you look at their proposed operating expenses, they're not proposing Covanta or a private operator at twice the rate of what they predicted the city operator would be. It was cheaper for the city to operate, and that's what the pro forma is based on. But if you look at today's expenses and compare it to the Barlow expenses, there are entire categories missing from their proposed expenses. But, you know, reasonable minds can disagree on that. Lastly, I've been calling for a forensic audit forever. The first time I called for it was in 2005 before City Council Public Works Committee. Then Chairperson Linda Thompson agreed with me. Nothing happened. 2007, when Mr. Papnafuse, Mr. Ellison, and Ms. Bryce had their first public, this wasn't a smoke-filled room in the back. We had public sessions for who to hire to do this project. And we're proud of the people we hired. We're proud of the work we did. We've received the report, but we've not made any public comment. We are not taking any specific position on a specific issue, which is why I was careful up front to say, I'm here as an individual, I don't speak for the board. All right? There are ongoing negotiations that the receiver and his team are doing with creditors and the sale of the assets. That's why I don't want to get into that.
And not to interrupt you, sir, and I appreciate those answers, but I have a couple more questions I want to get through, and I would like to get them on the record. First, I want to thank you for the history of the Harrisburg Authority. Now, one thing both strikes me and also makes this whole issue confusing are the changes in the board and the staff, especially the executive directors. To the best of your knowledge and memory, would you walk us through the authority's changes from the period of 2002 to 2003 through 2007 and today? And as a follow-up to Senator Eichelberger's, a number of Senator Eichelberger's questions, who, if anyone, was orchestrating these changes?
Tom Neely was the long-time executive director, but he was also an employee of the city of Harrisburg, so he was a part-time executive director. And that's because everything was being run by the city. Mr. Neely, I do not know the reason, but he left, I think it was in October 2006. He was replaced by Robert Ambrose, who was a professional engineer formerly employed by HRG. He was there for, I think, 6 or 7 months. The memos that I saw, he was asking some significant questions to the administration about significant issues. I don't know why he left, but you have to remember, In January of 2007, the city council took the power to appoint the board away from Mayor Reed. And this started a lengthy legal process. And there's the Reed board and then the council board and who's on the board. And over the year 2007, it was in flux, but that was the year we did the Covanta contract. That was the year we did the 2007 $30 million financing. At some point during the year, Michelle Torres became the executive director. She had a historical relationship with James Ellison, I believe through the Harrisburg School District. Michelle served as executive director till sometime in 2010. I'm now guessing on the dates. We brought in Shannon Williams as interim. Shannon had been serving as our engineer director, and she has done a magnificent job, and we've now named her the permanent executive director. And she is phenomenal. The difference in the Harrisburg Authority, and basically started with Michelle, was we started hiring our own people. If you look at all these transactions, you got bond counsel, authority counsel, there's never a CPA or financial advisor for the city. There's never the taxpayer representative. There's Bill Lopez on behalf of the authority, and you heard everybody today talk about the financial professionals making it. Well, the city's interest isn't necessarily aligned with the Harrisburg Authority. And in my retrospect and second guessing and Monday morning quarterbacking, I think the city should have had an independent financial advisor who would have been able to look and say, you know what, maybe there's an alternative. In 2000, it wasn't $104 million in stranded debt. In 2003, it was. But you made a decision in 2000 to do the retrofit. So you borrowed $17 million in 2002. You then restructured. You borrowed more money. The debt wasn't that high. If you'd shut it down in '99, when you knew you weren't going to meet the emission standards, maybe we could have done a GO bond for the city. I don't know, because nobody ever gave that advice to our knowledge to the city, for city council or the administration to evaluate that as the option instead of doubling down on a risky project.
Thank you very much for your time.